So I do want to start by commenting on the Isaiah passage in a way I don't comment on it in my sermon, and I am really serious about this. So as we enter into this election season that is way too early and coming on way too fast, I really do believe like Isaiah 40 verse 30 is one for you to like cut out of this bulletin and take to your refrigerator, and just realize that way back when Isaiah was around, there were problems with political leaders, right? And so this is what he says. God brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground, than God blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. And that's all political rulers. That's really all of us. But really what this is kind of saying is like, this too will pass. This too will pass. So don't get too upset. All right, so our gospel for this day is from Mark chapter 1, verses 29 to 39. And again, obviously, chapter 1, we're at the beginning of the gospel story according to Mark. And Jesus is just beginning his ministry with his newly found disciples. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So Jesus went to her, took her by the hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So when our older daughter, Isabel, was at the end of her middle school years and the beginning of her high school years, we would, from time to time, get into big fights. So the first lesson of this sermon is this. If you ask me, I could not tell you what even one of those fights was about. No idea, don't remember. But we both had short fuses and we could set each other off. And just because I don't remember what those fights were about, it doesn't mean that they weren't bad. So hand to Bible, I turned into that dad. I never thought I would turn into this dad, but I turned into that dad who said, if you don't stop right now, I'm going to turn this car around and we're going straight home. And a couple of times I did that, and she would get out of the car, run up to her room, slam the door, and we wouldn't see her until the next morning. So Thich Nhat Hanh had this advice for when you are in a fight with your beloved one. He said this, when you are angry with your beloved, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and picture you and your beloved 100 years from now. So part of the wisdom here is the same as Isaiah's when he said people are like grasshoppers. Even the great rulers of this world will soon be blown away like chaff. So one, don't take life so seriously. In the grand scope of things, you're not even a grasshopper. And on the other hand, don't waste the short time that you have on this earth being angry, especially with your beloved. So back to those fights with my daughter. Why would you ever allow yourself to become so angry with one of the people you love more than anyone else in this world? Why would you say hurtful things to that person? Why would you let them run away from your presence in anger? So I totally get why you would do that with someone you did not like and someone you hated. Maybe by doing that, you never have to see them again. But why would you say and do things like that to your beloved? And one reason I think is that you believe that you will have a chance in the future to make up. So if you didn't have tomorrow to make things better, you would be far less careless with people today, in the here and the now. So in a way, just the idea of the future, just the idea that you have tomorrow robs you of a chance to live in peace and joy and love today in the present moment. So one smaller way I think most of us do this, even if you don't shout and scream at your children, is when we say to ourselves about someone we love who is in some sort of need, I'll call them later, or I'll write them tomorrow, or I'll visit them maybe sometime next week. And even though you say that, that future never really seems to arrive. So a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that the Gospel of Mark uses the adverb immediately 41 times. And when Deb and I were in seminary, I asked about this yesterday, so I confirmed it with her. When we were in seminary, we were taught that Mark used this adverb to give his gospel story a sense of urgency, like one thing is immediately happening after another in quick succession. And so the story is speeding along to get Jesus to Jerusalem, where he will die and be resurrected, to get to the place where salvation really happens. And I remember back then people saying, oh, Mark's gospel is really a passion narrative, meaning it's a narrative about his death with just a little introduction. So the idea is you got to get to Jerusalem. But I'm really beginning to rethink that. So I also said a couple weeks ago that immediately means both right here and right now. So it can mean to do something right now, and it can mean to do something right here, like in the immediate vicinity of. So immediately is both about time and space, the here and the now. And so when you think about it, right here and right now is the only place we actually experience life. It's the only place we have a chance to do anything at all. Everything else is memory of the past or anticipation about the future. So here and now is all we have. It's when we live our lives. And all the great spiritual teachers and all the great spiritual traditions call us to pay more and more attention to what's going on here and now. So, for instance, Jesus teaches this: do not worry about tomorrow. Don't set your mind on tomorrow. And here's the thing about worry. Worry is not about the present. You're not worried about what's happening now, because most of the time, as I've said, nothing is happening right now. You're worried about the future. So worry is a future thing. So Jesus teaches us, do not worry about tomorrow. And then he says, can you add, by worrying, a single hour to your lifespan? No, you can't. So don't worry about tomorrow. So I'm beginning to rethink this adverb immediately in Mark's gospel. I think there might be a book in this. I think the immediacy in Mark's gospel is not about getting to Jerusalem, where the real salvation happens. I think it's about calling us back to the present moment, which is really the only moment that salvation can happen. So as the Gospel of Mark unfolds, one thing that is consistent throughout is that Jesus never walks away from anyone in need. He never walks away from the person right in front of him, right? The here and the now, that person. He never says, hey, we're on our way to bigger and better things. I've got to go die for the whole world. I don't have time for you. We got to get going. He never says that. He always stops and takes care of whatever and whoever is right in front of him. Whatever is happening in the here and the now, that is where he puts his attention. And if you read all of the gospel stories, his disciples often don't like that. They're like, don't stop for her. Don't stop for those children. Don't stop for him. We're on our way. But Jesus always stops. And so in today's gospel, we're offered what I think is probably my favorite healing story in all the gospels. And it isn't a fantastic healing story. That's part of what I like about it. So Jesus and his disciples are going home after a long day at synagogue, after a long day at church. They're probably tired. They're expecting to have a meal waiting for them when they arrive at Peter's house. And instead they find that Peter's mother-in-law was sick. So she was sick, but she wasn't blind. She wasn't deaf. She wasn't close to death. She wasn't possessed by a demon. She just had a fever. And so I was thinking about this. She is the least sick person Jesus ever encounters in all of the disciples. She just has a fever. And this is the first time Jesus ever heals anybody in the Gospels of a bodily disease. It's just a woman with a fever. So this isn't to prove that he's God, that he's doing something amazing. It's not for the public to see. He's doing this in the house, in her bedroom. This is an act born of compassion for someone who is right in front of him who is sick. So he hears that she's sick, and he went to her, and he took her by the hand, and he lifted her up, and the fever left her. It's so sweet. And as any parent knows, it's not that hard to do. So when someone in your household is sick with a fever, you take action. I mean, I distinctly remember when I was sick with fevers as a kid, my mother would come into my room over and over again with a cold washcloth for my forehead, with aspirin, with soup, with Vicks Vapor Rub, maybe some Sprite, whatever it took to make me well. And Deb and I did the same thing with our children, and I know you who have children did the same thing with your children. So when someone you love is sick, it's an opportunity to take action, to take part in their healing, to embody love. So you don't ever say, yeah, my kid is sick, maybe I'll go in and check on them tomorrow. Like, you don't put it off till tomorrow. And so what love does is love draws us fully into the present moment. So as I said, I love that this healing is so simple, so tender, and really something any of us can do. We can visit the sick. We can take hold of their hand and lift them from despair. We can lift up their spirits. So I remember my first hospital visit when I was a student pastor. So my supervisor and I were on our way to visit a church member who was close to death. And I was really nervous about it. I never liked hospitals in the first place, and I'd never really been in the presence of someone who was dying. And I was getting more and more nervous the closer we got to the hospital. And finally, I asked him, look, what do we do when we get in that room? What do we say? And he said, don't worry. 90% of it is just walking in the door. I think that's the wisest pastoral care thing I ever heard from anyone. 90% of it is just showing up and walking through the door. And then because I was a student, he said, after that, just don't say anything stupid and screw it up. And honestly, I do think sometimes our anxiety in those situations makes us say things stupid like, oh, it's going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay. She was really dying. But 90% is just showing up. Again, something that most of us can do. You don't need some fancy education to do that. So the practice laid before us in this gospel story is really quite simple. You got to notice that Jesus doesn't go out of his way to heal people. He was just trying to go have some dinner after church. He was probably really tired. So here and throughout the gospel, he just sort of ran into people who were suffering. And here's the thing, most people are suffering, so we don't really have to go out of our way to run into people who are suffering. And so I think this means that we don't have to go try and save and heal the whole world, or even, the multitudes. We don't have to start building hospitals or health clinics or soup kitchens. There's nothing wrong with that, but we don't have to do that. We start by just taking care of what happens before us in the present moment. Who is before you right now? That is the most important person in your life, whoever is standing before you right now. So the message is this: heal the suffering that is in front of you today. You don't have to go out of your way. You don't need any more skill than you already have to do that. You just need to make yourself available to what is happening right in front of you. So just heal what is in front of you, and you will be taking part in saving the world. So let me leave you with this. Any of us can heal a fever with a cold washcloth and a couple of Tylenol. Any of us can open a hospital door or a bedroom door and walk in and offer comfort. Any of us can take another person by the hand and lift them up. And when we do those things, it makes all the difference in the world. It makes all the difference.